Alright everyone, welcome back to another Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes video with Fat Phil, and today we have to have an uncomfortable conversation about farming guides. We're going to be talking about their purpose in Galaxy of Heroes, how it's changed, are there any updates to the Fat Phil farming guide, when will there be updates, all that kind of stuff, guys. I think this will be a very uncomfortable conversation. I'm not sure how many of you will like it, but I think it's the truth. So go ahead, please like and subscribe, comment down below. Love to hear your thoughts. Let's give a massive shout out to the channel members for supporting me. Thank you guys for putting your faith in me. I apologize that the content has not been up to snuff. It's just been, you know, I think channel members, I got to put a message out there. I got to give you guys kind of what's going on. So appreciate all of your support. Let's kind of have this conversation about farming guides. All right, so I want to kind of flip over into the Fat Phil farming guide a little bit. And so just to kind of give you an overview of what I think farming guides in the past used to be, they were like a recipe that back, you know, way before when, you know, Squad Arena still had crystals, before Datacrons, Omicrons, you know, changed to Rise of the Empire, like when, you know, before even like, you know, the raid change, when all that stuff happened, it really changed the way farming guides were. That back in the day, the game was much more rigid. There wasn't as much movement inside of the meta. There might be a new GL that comes to the game, but it was a lot harder. Like when Jedi Master Kenobi came in, it still wasn't like he was in brand new shards. So the meta moved a lot more slowly, and so with that, it was very easy just to kind of follow a farming guide to build one thing, build the next thing, and you'd be rock solid. That Sith Eternal would allow you to climb to the tippy top. As the game has become more fluid, as these changes like the raid, crystals moving into Grand Arena, got Rise of the Empire, Conquest now. All of these things have kind of led us to what farming guides are today, which I would liken it to the way that I go bowling with my daughter Harper. What I mean by that is my daughter, when we take her bowling, she uses the little slide and we put the bumpers up. And so at first, you know, she's using that slide because she's not able to really bowl it straight yet. She's not quite strong enough to hold that bowling ball and, you know, roll it down the floor, you know, in a straight line. It'll bounce off the walls like crazy, but it won't, you know, it's not going to be straight. So she uses that little slide thing. And that's kind of what farming guides are now, is that you're going to start off and it's kind of like that slide, right? We're going to give you as much help as possible. And then as you get a little bit later on, there's still those bumpers up if you're following a guide, but there's room to change, right? There's room that you can kind of hit off this side and hit off that side. You can deviate, but as long as you're still following the overview of a farming guide, you're in the lane. You still have a good chance to hit the pins. You can still get a strike. Now, if you're going too crazy, there's a very good potential that you could hit, you know, there's still potential to hit nothing and that you just completely crash and burn. But that's kind of how I view farming guides now, that it's like bowling, with the slide and the bumpers up, and that eventually you take the slide away and you still have bumpers. That should be the point of any farming guide now, is you need to use it to kind of guide, you know, and I know guides in the thing. Think of it, it's not a code, it's guidelines. Let me know if you get that movie reference. But I think that's kind of how you have to view a farming guide nowadays. It's not this rigid thing that you have to stick to and can't deviate from, because the game is so fluid that when this new raid happens or when something changes in Conquest, you oftentimes have to pivot a little bit if you want to continue that progress forward. So with farming guides, one of the biggest things I will always say is you need to know what the purpose of that farming guide is. Not, oh, Fat Phil's is Executor and then Jabba the Hutt. No. The purpose of my farming guide is to give you the best base to build from. It's to give you a great fleet and then a great galactic legend that is good in Conquest, Territory Battles, Territory Wars, Grand Arena, you know, has the Smugglers Run too. It's the, in my opinion, he's the best base to build from because you have the most options afterwards. That you still have all of those little things that you could do here, like the Malak and the Revans and Starkiller. You can go a bunch of different directions there. Or you can kind of continue through into Leia, Jedi Master Luke, Profundity, that all kind of tie together really, really nicely. That's why I like Jabba, is that whichever way you go, you're not really making a wrong choice per se. If it's in one of these directions, I kind of gave you the guidelines and you pick and choose what you want to do. Now, another thing with farming guides that I think some of their value has kind of diminished is the light speed bundles. that with, these light speed bundles, one of the big issues that we're beginning to see is that a farming guide, if it's like, well, Phil, what am I supposed to do? I've got Ray, I've got Kylo, like, what do I do next? And you don't have a farming guide for that. You're right, I don't. And it probably doesn't make sense for you to just rush into something else when you've got these two really good things. So I think farming guides have lost some of that value in the later stages of the game with the addition of light speed bundles, because there's so many players that are all over the place in terms of where their farms are. So that kind of brings the question, are there any changes to mine? And the answer is no. That I think up to Jabba, this guide is still very, very good. I would not change it in the slightest. When the new raid drops, I will take a look at the characters and say these would be good ones to work on. But we'll figure out where they kind of fit into this process. Are there certain teams that we kick out? Because if this is a raid where if you don't have the Gungans and you don't have Queen Amidala, you're not scoring well, then I would not go crazy trying to build stuff for the raid. But if it's one that you can do very well with some of the existing characters, then we'll be fine. So we'll get there. But I would say that after Jabba, that's where this guy just starts to lose value, because you're too far into the future, right? At that point, you're too far into the future. It just, there's not enough that you can do. So what does that mean for those of you who are still following it? It just means that after Jabba, you need to give yourself a look in the mirror and say, all right, what makes the most sense for me? What can I do now that will benefit my account? And I think that's why I say this is an uncomfortable conversation, because a lot of players will want more and more farming guides, but I think that the issue with a lot of farming guides is that they'll need to be updated every single time. Like, just think of this current conquest cycle. Sector 1, you need kills with light side Mandalorians, evasion up, kills at Ewoks, will win with resistance units. So how, that for the next 3 months, you're going to want to have those factions in order to, complete conquest, right? All these different factions and stuff, you're going to need these. Well, in the next conquest, maybe those change and you're going to need new things. And so it's one of those where a farming guide now is only as good as what it's preparing you to do. Like, think of, going back to, this topic here with, AP Gains. When he and I did our collab, and we were kind of like chatting candidly off camera and stuff. And one of the things that we had both said was that his farming guide for going for the Core 8 was completely designed around giving you the best possible GAC base for GAC. It was not designed for Territory Wars or TB or Conquest. It was purely designed for GAC. And if you followed that guide, you followed his methods of, the ship's only defense and all that stuff, you would probably have the best account for Grand Arena. Mine, we're not as concerned about just doing well in Grand Arena. We're trying to do well in all the game modes. So I don't care whose guide you follow. If you go with a Core 8, you go with Fat Philly, go with Nooch, whoever it is, just, kind of ask that question of what's the purpose of it. Because if you don't know the purpose of a guide, then what are you doing, right? You're just kind of following aimlessly along, and you could lead to making poor decisions. Because if you're trying to build a guide, say you're following a guide for Territory Wars, right? That you're trying to be as good as you can in, I don't have Territory Wars available right now, but you're trying to be as good as you can in Territory Wars. Well, if you start building Savage and Wampa and Treya, like, those are GAC Omicron characters. You don't want to be investing there. You need Ahsoka Tano Fulcrum. You need Cal Kestis. You need who else would be, Phasma and Droidica, right? Those kind of characters. So 100%, guys, I think guides are beginning to lose a little bit of their value in the later stages because the fluidity of the game has changed so much. And I think that so just to give you a heads up on what'll happen in the coming weeks, right? So whenever we get the characters for the raid, we'll kind of take a look at, hey, here's some good ones to do early in the game, later in the game. And then as the raid happens, I'll kind of develop hey, these are probably the best teams that I would use. And we'll look at that from the free-to-play perspective as well, that, if you were to look in the speeder bike raid, everybody would tell you that Admiral Akbar should be Relic 8. Right? Like, everybody's like, oh yeah, Admiral Akbar's so good, he's so important in the raid, take him to Relic 8. That's not really realistic for somebody who is free-to-play in a guild where you're scoring, 200 million in the box. Like, you're not going to need that. So those are kind of my thoughts on farming guides at the moment. That I think now they need to be much more about, kind of that bowling alley with bumpers and the little slide. That you need to use it like that and understand that you're going to be bouncing off a little bit because the game is a lot more fluid, that it's constantly changing. Think, this Datacron set right now, we've got one for Supreme Leader Kylo Ren, we got him for Rey. Well, once Rey's disappears, we're going to get something new that's going to be, the meta. And so your farming guide can't be go get Rey, right? And that's exactly why we don't factor in Datacrons into farming guides, because they're constantly changing. And very similarly, same thing with Conquest. Why I don't try to say, hey, build this faction because they're amazing in Conquest. I like to say build the GLs like Jabba, like Leia and Jedi Master Luke. With those GLs, you'll get their non-attackers. You've got a tank, and then you got 2 tanks and then a support. So there's a couple different ways to earn those feats. But then, most importantly, with Jabba and Leia, they're not light side, they're Sith, Jedi, light side, dark side online Force user. So they can also get those feats when they crop up. So that's kind of, just a little bit more into farming guides and stuff. But let me know your thoughts. Am I kind of rambling around too much? Should you just said, Fat Phil, you're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. I love you all. May the Force be with you, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, my friends.